Hello, fellow fish nerds and students, past, present, future, and ones I've never taught and never will teach. Welcome to part two of my online virtual science classroom. You see, I'm teaching now from the comfort of my own car. My wife and daughter went inside to go look at frames. Sorry, that's boring. So finally got a quiet time to be able to record this video. This is part two in the Watershed series, and this one is going to be focused and about the history of the Chesapeake Bay watershed. This is honestly one of my favorite parts to talk about when it comes to the Chesapeake Bay watershed. So, stay tuned. Chesapeake Bay watershed history, as far as we know it, as far as recorded history of the Chesapeake Bay watershed, of the Chesapeake Bay, started in 1607 when Captain John Smith came over here with the Virginia Company and settled, whatever you would say, Jamestown. He wrote in his journals, as was common practice in his day for gentlemen, men that could actually read and write, landowners, wrote in his journal that the Chesapeake Bay was so clear you could see through to the bottom. Now, the average depth of the Chesapeake Bay is 22 feet. Can you imagine being able to see through to the bottom of the Chesapeake Bay? Those of you that have ever been to it know that that's not possible now. I'm kind of jealous. I would love to see that. That's like huge rest of the world bucket list item. Hey, rest of the world, do this so I can see the bottom of the Chesapeake Bay. Imagine the Chesapeake Bay being as clear as what it is in the Caribbean, or the Caribbean, however you pronounce it, like for it is for people like J.H. Aquatics down in the Virgin Islands. It's that clear. I mean, I'm so jealous. So he wrote in his journals about it being that clear. Now, keep in mind, it was common practice for men that wrote journals in those days to exaggerate a little bit, to stretch the truth, to extend the truth a little bit. Now, this was also the same time as Shakespeare, approximately, if I'm getting my history correct. But from what we can tell, what people can tell by reading John Smith's journals, is that he wasn't exaggerating or stretching the truth that much. So, super impressive. Now, what was it that made it possible to have the Chesapeake Bay be that clear? Well, there's a lot of factors. One, there wasn't that much construction to stir up the sediment, to stir up topsoil, to make things murky, cloudy, and turbid, which is the other word for murky. The only construction going on was of the Powhatan Indian tribes, which only cut down trees that they needed to build their own houses, and their population was not huge, so that didn't make a huge impact. Two, the Chesapeake Bay grass's population was much bigger than what it is now. Our goal now is to get the Chesapeake Bay grass's population size up to about 120,000 to 150,000 acres. I think last time I read an article, I think we're just above 100,000 acres. I think the goal is 150,000 is what I read in that article. The Chesapeake Bay grass, which a lot of people with boats, they'll pull it up and think it's an invasive species or think it's going to get in the way of their propellers. So that's one problem. But anyway, the Chesapeake Bay grasses, their roots help to hold in the sediment and help to absorb the nutrients. Third thing that caused the Chesapeake Bay, or allowed it to be so clear back then, was the oyster population. John Smith also wrote in his journals that last night my men dined on oysters the size of a man's forearm. That's that big. It takes up the entire screen. Now, I'm not that tall of a person. I'm like 5'8" when I stand up straight with perfect posture. Oyster that big, and that is it's possible because that is, if left to grow to their fullest maturity, that's how big an oyster can get. He wrote, they were the size of dinner plates. Imagine getting full on a meal of oysters. It would only take like 3 or 4 oysters. I'm jealous on that account too. I like oysters. Can you imagine just eating 3 of them and be done? I mean, it takes 12 of them now as an appetizer, especially when you're like me and you have this double chin going on. Some cocktail sauce and some Mountain Dew, of course. But, so jealous of that. One oyster can filter 55 gallons of water, I think, in a day, I think is what I read. There were so many oysters in 1607 that a storm could come through and completely stir everything up, like this. Sorry, that was like probably the worst video quality idea thing to ever do. But it would make it completely turbid, completely murky. And there's enough oysters in the bay that it could be clear in a matter of 3 to 4 days. Now think about it. Is it possible to have a 3 to 4 day stretch of not having a storm? Yes. In fact, it's been 3 or 4 days, almost a week, and we haven't had rain or a storm here. I wish we could have some rain so I could fill up my rain barrels finally. But no, I wish I could have some rain to wash the pollen off my car, but no. So yes, it is possible to go 3 to 4 days without having a storm. Fast forward to right now. The size of the Chesapeake Bay oyster population, we have enough oysters, and they're big enough to, if we had a storm, it would take a year for the oysters to be able to filter out the sediment in order for it to be clear again. Now, is it possible to go a year without a storm in Virginia or Maryland? No. If it was, I'd be worried about other things other than just the Chesapeake Bay. There's a lot of other issues that would be going on with that. I mean, water is kind of important. It's kind of a big deal. So that's also what he wrote. So, what I say, the lack of erosion, deforestation, had less erosion, less sediment pollution, less murky water, more Chesapeake Bay grasses, more oysters. Those are the 3 biggest things right there. Also, people didn't use fertilizer. Obviously, the Powhatan Indians didn't use fertilizer of man-made sources. They used fertilizer like they would plant fish with their crops to provide a natural source of nitrogen and carbon for their crops. They would use what was naturally there. There weren't large cattle farms. So that's the 4, lacking in nutrient pollution or eutrophication, eutrophication, eutrophication or nutrient pollution, which is where an excess of nutrients washes away because of runoff, because of spring rains, goes into the waterways. In the springtime, there's more sunlight, more higher temperatures, and plus nutrients. You get an algae bloom. And us fishermen don't like algae. Algae bloom on top equals less sunlight getting through. Less sunlight getting through equals less plants. Less plants equals less oxygen because no photosynthesis. Less oxygen equals dead fish. No one wants dead fish. That smells bad. Dead fish equals decaying fish. Decaying fish equals more bacteria. More bacteria equals less oxygen. It's a huge problem. It creates what's called a dead zone in Chesapeake Bay. It also happened in Washington, D.C. in the reflection pool a few summers ago. I think it was like 2014 is when it happened. Look it up. Type in Washington, D.C. Reflection pool dead fish or something like that. Do a Google search for it. It'll show that that's what caused it. So those are the 4 things that allowed the Chesapeake Bay to be much clearer back then. So then later on, after they got through the first winter of, not starving and not dying of dehydration from dysentery, aka diarrhea, once they finally got through that first winter, they went exploring up the James as far as they could, and they got to a point where they had to stop, at least for a while, which was the fall line, where there's a bunch of rocks, where literally the water falls over the rocks. So they got to this fall line where they had to take their boats out and move them around to go further upstream. And he wrote in his journals that there were enough Atlantic sturgeon at the fall line as if a person could walk across them like stepping stones. Now, was that an exaggeration? Only in the fact that it was like stepping. It was a simile. It was a little bit of a exaggeration. It was metaphorical. Okay, so he also wrote that the Powhatan Indian boys would ride on the backs of the sturgeon as if to prove their manhood, like they were riding on the back of a wild bull. Now, were they really doing that? I don't know. But are teenage boys crazy enough to try something like that? Yes, we all know that teenage boys are capable of doing things like that. At this point in the James River, which is where he was exploring, I think I read in an article that there was 65 breeding Atlantic sturgeon in the James River. If they can count it and it's less than 100, that's a problem. Okay, what's causing that? Too much silt and sediment buildup to where the Atlantic sturgeon can't lay their eggs. They like to lay their eggs on rocks. They lay like 400,000 eggs at a time. If just one could have a successful place to lay their eggs, and they could grow up to adulthood, and only 1/10 of them survive. That's 40,000? 40,000. Okay. Or maybe what, 4,000? I'm really bad at math, people. Okay. But still, let's say 4,000. That's 1%, right? 4,000 survived. That would be huge. Okay, so let's cut it with this silt and sediment buildup on the bottom of the James River. Let's plant some more Chesapeake Bay grasses. If you own waterfront property somewhere in the Chesapeake Bay watershed, York River, Rappahannock River, Potomac River, any of those areas that are brackish, or any tributary of those rivers, the James River where it's brackish, and you have access to a pier or a dock, then go and find a place to get seed oysters to start your own oyster farm, basically, and then go return some and start your own oyster reef somewhere. And you know what? Eat some too. They're tasty. Okay? You can get some tasty oysters and help the Chesapeake Bay get clear again. What? You don't have that? Okay. Then someone help me find this grass called the what's it called? Wild celery. It's a type of a Chesapeake Bay grass. It can grow in fresh water. If I could find that seed, if you let me know, please contact me down below. Email me, MrScienceGeekChannel@gmail.com, and let me know if you can find some wild celery seed. It's a type of fully aquatic, freshwater friendly Chesapeake Bay grass. I would love to grow my fish tanks, teach my students about it, and show them, hey, look, let's go replant this and that'll help. Yeah, it's maybe a few square feet of Chesapeake Bay grasses, but still, it's teaching them a lesson. It would teach them to show them, like, hey, I'm doing what I can here. I'm growing these in my fish tanks in my classroom. I want to see what you can do. Okay, so let me know by email or comments below if you have. I've looked. I can't find it right now. I would like to find more. So, anyways, those are the things that you could do. But seriously, the coolest thing, if I had riverfront property in any of the rivers that feed in the Chesapeake Bay, the brackish areas, I would sow. I might even talk to people that I know that have one. It's just this metal cage that's not even that big that hangs off the side of a dock. You put it down there in early spring, and in late fall, like October, and that's not even late fall, that's mid-fall, you pull them out and you go put some on make a new oyster reef somewhere, and it filters, and then you eat some. I mean, how much tastier can it get to help the Chesapeake Bay? Anyways, I digress. It was food. Of course I get distracted by food. Even though I just had dinner, it was this shrimp wrap. It was really good. It had this homemade hot sauce, which was really good, a little spicy. But anyways, once again, I digress. It was food. So, history of the Chesapeake Bay watershed, that basically covers it. Okay, so let's get it back to that point. I would love to get it back there again. It's getting better. Okay, it's getting better. Also read an article recently, it was published, I think April 24th-ish or so, that they are trying a new way of planting oyster reefs. I think it's in a sphere, and it's gonna be a way that, because of the tides and whether they work around that, and there's a lot of pretty advanced science when it comes to that it's going to help the clarity of the water and the oyster reefs take off. So anyways, I hope you all enjoyed it. I do plan on having a part 3 video, which is on basic water quality and things that we can do to improve the water quality of the Chesapeake Bay watershed and your local watershed. Stay tuned and stay fishy, people.